My parents made me what I am. I am the protector of the deep.
Hey everybody, it's Charlie. This is going to be my non-spoilery review of Aquaman. I'll also try to rank my favorite DCEU films at the end of the video too, because now there have been 6, so it's pretty easy to do a top 5 list. I know there are a lot of questions about what this movie means for the future of the DCEU. People are wondering about reboot and all that stuff, so I'll try to address that as I talk about what the movie did, how it did it, and how it compares to the other DC movies so far. We're doing a new round of that IMAX ticket giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your favorite Aquaman moment on the video. So we'll start with the story, then I'll talk about the characters, how they changed the Aquaman character from previous incarnations during the Zack Snyder Justice League Batman v Superman, because we have seen versions of Aquaman before in this universe, but the Aquaman movie treats him in a very different way. Early on, there were a lot of comparisons to the plot of the Black Panther movie where a king needs to take his throne, but a brother or like a family member tries to take it from him, so they have to do battle. There's this journey of self-discovery and self-actualization as they become the true version of the comic book character within their own respective universe, DC Universe or the MCU. But really, that's where the comparison ends. Like, the Aquaman movie is so different from Black Panther, so it doesn't feel like it at all. Even though on a very basic surface level, if you try to tell someone the plot in less than 5 seconds, they might sound similar. Like, it is very, very different. It looks very different. The Aquaman movie felt a lot bigger, like it escalates to global scale much more quickly than the Black Panther movie did. And nowhere is that more evident than the big, huge action scenes. So one of the high points of the film was the way they treated the big action scenes, because as you see from the trailers, there could have been a couple potential problems. Like, it does feel kind of formulaic the way that he has to battle his brother Ocean Master for the throne of Atlantis. And if you've ever watched the animated movie or you read the comics, obviously it was inspired a lot by that story. But James Wan and the fight choreographers did a really good job trying to turn their big battles into much more interesting affairs than, say, something like you would see at the end of the Wonder Woman movie, which was probably one of the weakest parts of that film. Most people talking about the movie are focusing on the tone and how it's so different from previous DC movies, and nowhere is that more evident than in Jason Momoa's character himself. They had started to get there a little bit with his character during Justice League. He does have a couple funny moments, but mostly he's this background linebacker that just walks around looking badass in a really cool piece of armor with his Quindent. But you don't really get a sense for his personality till they're on the back of Batman's ship and they have that funny confessional scene where Aquaman sort of accidentally, but totally on purpose, puts the lasso of truth underneath him, so he completely spills his guts to them. There was a big question about what Jason Momoa is going to feel like trying to carry a movie by himself. I will say, thankfully, he's a great version of Aquaman, and he can totally do this. I think there are a couple things they need to tweak for potential sequels, but if you've been watching the Chinese box office, like, they released it in China a little while ago, and it's been doing gangbusters. So it sounds like what's going to happen is the international box office all by itself will guarantee a sequel. They've already started talking about that, but we can get into that when I talk about spoilers and Easter eggs. The movie itself does a great job of world building because it's all fresh territory. Like, you've never really been to Atlantis but for a couple quick scenes during Justice League. So obviously there are a lot of huge visual changes in the way they portray that. James Wan himself said that when he started working on this a couple years ago, while they were still ramping up on production for Justice League, he said that Warner Brothers just let him do whatever he wanted. They're like, this is great. He obviously visited the set a lot when they were doing Batman v Superman and Justice League, so he had a chance to talk with Zack Snyder and the other filmmakers that were involved with those movies. But when it actually came time to writing and designing what everything was going to look and feel like, he just decided to do his own thing. One of the benefits being that there aren't really any times during the Aquaman movie when it steps on the toes of stuff that the other movies have done. There are bits of crossover, but without getting into spoilers, I'll say it's mostly at Easter egg level. So, like, it doesn't necessarily tell you what's going to be happening in a lot of these other DC movies because they have a lot of different filmmakers that are coming in working on them. But the film is part of the DC universe. There are lots of points of connection, lots of references, characters talking about things that happened during the other movies. So this takes place after Justice League, if that wasn't clear. It's about a year after the events of Justice League, so a while has gone by. But obviously I know a lot of you want to know about the villains. Black Manta is a huge comic book character, big fan favorite. I feel like even though Ocean Master did a good job, I'll talk about him in a second, Black Manta, because he's potential sequel material, was one of the best things about the film, even though he wasn't around as much as you would expect him to be. But one of the minor complaints that I had about the movie was some of the ways that they use pop songs during certain points The actual original score was pretty good. Like Aquaman has a great theme song. Black Manta's theme song was one of my favorites. So I'm really looking forward to what they do with him in the future of the universe. Obviously, he's fair game for any Aquaman sequels, but the actor teased that he could pop up in other DC movies too. So it'll just depend on what those other DC filmmakers want to do, if they want to borrow the character. But I'm only expecting him right now in whatever the Aquaman sequel winds up being. There's a lot of talk about Jason Momoa's chemistry with Amber Heard. I feel like she actually did a pretty good job with Mira. There were a couple awkward moments with the two of them on screen together. If you've watched any of the junket interviews that they've done, they've been posting a lot of them. They get a little awkward at times. There were moments in the movie that were just like that, where some of the jokes feel like they don't quite land between the two of them and they get a little too broad. But a lot of that you can fix with a little extra work on the script. Like one of the really big things that James Wan had to deal with is that somebody else actually cast his main leads, which usually most directors don't have to deal with. Like a director has a very specific vision for his movie, the way it looks, the way it feels, what the story is. One of the biggest parts of that is him finding the actors that he feels like most embody what he wants that vision to look like. And when you have main leads that somebody else cast, like Zack Snyder, you're trying to meld their vision with your vision, because Jason Momoa is like the ultimate vision of what Zack Snyder thought that Aquaman was, not necessarily other filmmakers. It also kind of happened with Spider-Man. Like Tom Holland, I think, has done a great job with Spider-Man. But the Russos cast him. Then when they got to Spider-Man Homecoming, the director of that movie, John Watts, just had to sort of fit Tom Holland into his vision for Spider-Man Homecoming instead of starting from scratch. But it went great for Spider-Man in the MCU, so I also feel like it worked well for Jason Momoa inside the DC universe. So James Wan did make appropriate use of Jason Momoa. And in terms of performance and charisma, the way he carries himself, he is definitely playing Jason Momoa on screen. Like, yes, it's like the Jason Momoa version of Aquaman, but if you've ever watched Jason Momoa in real life, like he does a lot of funny Instagram and social media posts, it feels a lot like Jason Momoa just walking around doing all the things that Aquaman would be doing during this movie. So when he reacts, the types of jokes that he tells, his personality, you're mostly thinking about Jason Momoa on screen instead of thinking about Aquaman. So I think, there are probably some really hardcore Aquaman comic book fans out there that might feel like that's a little bit weird. But I think for most people it'll be fine. And for most of the other cast, like the other character actors, like Willem Dafoe that's playing Vulko, most of them slip into those characters, so you're not thinking as much about Willem Dafoe watching Vulko, and you're not thinking as much about Amber Heard when you're watching Mira. I haven't talked a whole lot about Ocean Master, but Patrick Wilson, I think, did a pretty good job with the material that they gave him. Even though he's been in the DC universe before, he was in Zack Snyder's Watchmen. I wouldn't say that it quite reaches the Shakespeare Black Panther levels of Killmonger, but they did a good job with his motivation, and he does feel like a real character, like he's not a mustache-twirling villain, and they do give him places to go in potential future sequels. So if you're a big Aquaman comic book fan, you will chuckle a little bit with the way they reference their comic book personas, because technically he has not become Ocean Master when the movie begins. So even though very few people that read comics refer to his character as Orm, he sort of becomes that character in the way that the Aquaman character becomes the comic book Aquaman character. Yes, there is a big origin story. They try to tell it in a roundabout way. Obviously, they're trying to do more non-traditional origin stories with superheroes movies now just because we've gotten so many. Nicole Kidman is a big part of that. She is a badass in the way that I never thought that she would be. Like, you see her do a lot of drama on screen. Like, she's been in a lot of HBO series recently. She's an amazing actress, but it is kind of fun watching her do crazy stunts on screen. So for the most part, though, you will have a lot of fun seeing the way they treat the lore and looking for all the Easter eggs, and it does feel like a really fun, rewatchable movie that does a really good job of broadening the DC universe in a direction that you've never seen before, mostly down into the ocean. But surprisingly, it does get to a relatively cosmic level, so I am hoping for future potential Wonder Woman Aquaman crossover in the future, because she does get into a lot of the bigger cosmic god level stuff as well. But a lot of that will have to wait till we get to Easter egg videos. There are a couple spoilery things that I do really want to talk about that were really exciting during the film. But keep your eyes peeled for a couple surprise cameos. There are a couple voiceover cameos you may have heard about in the news that you'll have to keep your ears tuned for, but they're really cool. So overall, really fun film. I mean, fans will be arguing about where this sits in the top 5 DC movies so far. Everybody has their favorites, mostly because of the characters they like and the tone that they like. But overall, this film really kind of sits in like a tied top 3 status with Man of Steel and Wonder Woman. So I feel like for slightly different reasons, all these films are the best of the DC universe so far. Then number 4, Justice League, just because it was a bit of a mess. Batman v Superman. Then obviously my least favorite film is Suicide Squad. But there've only been 6 films, so within a year or 2, we'll have a lot more to compare this to, especially with Shazam that's coming up pretty soon, then Wonder Woman 1984. There will be more Shazam stuff dropping in January sometime. I don't know what the exact date is, but